Hey guys, welcome to You'll Probably Agree. And today, with me, as always, is Jeff York from The Establishing Shot. And oh, hang on a minute, I gotta mute my. I had my live stream going in a separate window, and immediately it was repeating everything I was saying. Anyways, as always, I have Jeff York on from The Establishing Shot, and today we're talking about terrifying moments in movies that aren't qualified as horror films, although I would argue that some of these are, in fact, horror films. But Jeff, we kind of discussed this idea and what we thought we would do with it, and in the end, I guess we kind of came up with a clip show idea. So, anyways, I guess we'll start with our first clip, and this is the one that Jeff recommended to me, and it's one that is ubiquitous within the whole entertainment industry stratosphere, and that is the flying monkeys from The Wizard of Oz. Let's roll the clip and then talk about why everyone has revered this scene as both a wonderful part of the story and also horrifying.
Take your army to the haunted forest and bring me that girl and her dog. Now fly! Fly!
Woo! Yeah, so for kids that might be pretty messed up. But Jeff, tell me, why did you recommend the flying monkeys? Because the way you put it, it was the blank in all caps flying monkeys.
Well, I think it's fascinating that, really you think about us as children starting out to watch entertainment coming from Hollywood. And one of the biggest memories of kids, at least of a certain age, maybe not as much anymore, but or people of my generation, and maybe yours too, Mike, where they would show The Wizard of Oz on television year in and year out. And it's certainly become probably the most watched movie by audiences everywhere because was shown annually, and it's shown across the globe. And I think it's, one of the probably 10 most classic films if you had to come up with the quintessential 10 classic films. But it's fascinating because for all of the gosh, gee whiz kind of, Dorothy Gale courage and pluck to her, and the funny three characters that she travels with, and the really witty, punny, clever songs, and the color when she gets to the land of Oz, and everything is so beautiful, and even the ruby slippers. It's got some elements that are designed to scare the crap out of even adults, let alone kids. And yeah, we all love it because I think we all love being scared, and Halloween and ghost stories and stuff like that get into our brains early on. But it's funny, for such a sort of mainstream G-rated movie, you start off with somebody wanting to kill a dog, and put it destroyed. I'm going to make sure he's destroyed. That's the line that Miss Gulch says. And, then there's this terrifying twister, and oh my God, it's coming close, and Dorothy can't get down into the cellar and with the rest of her family. And then she's taken up in the twister with her house and the dog, poor little vulnerable Toto. So it's scary right there. And then, it introduces the Wicked Witch, and she's green and evil and cackling, and she, comes and goes in a puff of red smoke, like she's going right to hell, coming back up and down from hell itself. And then when we get to the flying monkeys, I think they just about reach the zenith of horror because they're monsters. They don't look like monkeys. Of course, they're sort of more human-esque because they've got humans in there pretending to be them. But I think, as you saw in that scene, it's not only terrifying that she sends probably dozens upon dozens of these winged henchmen after the famous 4 or 5, if you count Toto, that we like, but they're shot with a great sense of horror too. There's the scale, there's the volume of them. When they're flying past the window, my God, how many are there coming at to get these 4 creatures or 5? And then, the overhead shot that Victor Fleming, the director, did to show them, coming down on them. It's almost like bombs dropping in a way. It's terrifying. And yet we love it. And most people remember it as this feel-good movie, and agreed it is. But that, and I would argue Snow White in the same decade, really kind of set kids up like, hey, movies are great. You go into this theater, you sit and watch the screen, and we pull out a story for you, and you'll laugh, you'll cry. And yes, you'll crap the seats at the Radio City Music Hall. Of course, the famous story about Snow White was they had to reupholster the seats because kids were peeing in their seats watching the Wicked Witch and Other Wicked Witch and Snow White. And I think in so many respects, those things really stick in our minds. And maybe that's good, maybe it's bad. I mean, it creates nightmares and stuff. But if you look at The Wizard of Oz, there are plenty of elements that could qualify that as a horror show. And certainly as many scary scenes in it, directly physical scary scenes, as a lot of horror movies, and even, classic movies like, I would say, The Exorcist or Silence of the Lambs, that, were big mainstream films that were arguably classified as horror. And The Wizard of Oz probably has as many scenes and sort of elements minute for minute as those bona fide horror movies do. So I think it
Yeah.
was a good place to start. And I remember thinking it still freaks me out when I see those monkeys. And now I can appreciate how well they're done. And, the director saying, rather than just 10 flying by, let's have it seems like there's 100 of them. And
Yeah.
we'll have them so far back that they're just patrolling the skies like they're all hovering around, Newark during rush hour or something on a weekend.
Yeah.
And it's truly terrifying. And then they actually attack. They pull the scarecrow apart. They clank around the Tin Man and steal Dorothy and her dog. The one monkey scoops up Toto, like, we're taking him.
Yeah.
So
Right.
it plays on all of the fears, and I think there's still palpable ones today.
Yeah. Well, the elements of that scene that I think are terrifying is like when you're a kid, I think like like terrifying elements from when you're a kid really develop when you become an adult. And those flying monkeys, I always had a weird experience with the Wizard of
Yeah,
Oz because
yeah,
everyone considers it this light, happy, kind of like, fun film. But like when I was a kid, I will always remember my nightmares, and they were kind of projected in the way the Wizard of Oz was, because I'm a child of the 80s and I come from a time where, the quality of the film was better. But when I saw the Wizard of Oz, like when they're like running around with the munchkins and singing, for some reason, it kind of looked like a nightmare to me. And that
yeah,
wasn't the intention of the film at all. And then, so when they get to the flying monkeys, it kind of capitalizes on sort of my misunderstanding of the film, because now I'm like, well, yeah, this kind of looks like a nightmare, and these monkeys kind of look like something in a nightmare because they're not bats and they're not really monkeys. In fact, they're like demons from hell, and you see these terrifying looking things like
yeah,
being escorted in large numbers. And then of course there's that shot where they're getting closer to the frame, and then when they're on top of everyone and they're touching them, it does feel like they're coming closer to you, especially because I don't know if you've heard this, but they have like now these like 15K projections of the movie on a like 180-degree screen, where they're actually like adding wind effects during the tornado and all that. So imagine seeing that on like you're actually in the movie projection. Yeah, they look like something that you would see from like a classic horror film. Like they look like the evil werewolf, and it doesn't look too cheesy or overdone, although it's like made in a time where things were cheesy and overdone. But it kind of it does have that old film style that makes it more kind of like realistic than like CGI monkeys would have.
right. What you're referring to is in Vegas now they have a special
Mhm.
version of The Wizard of Oz showing at the Sphere, which was this big concert hall that has all these sort of interactive effects. They throw wind and dust and debris at you during the tornado scene, and they've created this giant screen that is like, I think, I don't know, 100 and 200 feet tall, that they've expanded the thing and added AI to it to make it more circular and expansive, tall and wide. And yeah, apparently they even have like some flying monkeys coming over you, sort of characters on strings or rope, wires, whatever, for that part of the movie to make it all the more interactive and stuff. the learners, Alan and Linda, who are critics in our group,
Mhm.
went and saw that in Vegas, and they wrote about it on their site,
Yeah.
moviesandsshakers.com.
Yeah.
And it sounds pretty interesting. You can also find clips of it on YouTube and TikTok and such. But yeah, they recognize that those scary elements are worth sort of blowing out because they are so visceral, just as film, let alone with the potential of becoming even more so if they're larger and enhanced with the 15K photographic qualities, let alone visual effects and other kind of actual effects that they can do, whether it's strobe lighting or lasers or sound effects or even debris that they blow on you to make it
Yeah.
seem like you're part of it all and stuck in the eye of the twister. It's even more terrifying. And for the adults who are willing to pay the rather exorbitant prices for a ticket, it's probably quite scary.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, yeah, The Wizard of Oz, like it's like a magical film, but it does have those kind of scary elements, and it knew how to balance them. And I'm gonna guess, especially for its time, it must have been crazy for the audience. But then again, like this movie was wonderfully revered and embraced, but a sequel, or actually, what I learned is not an official sequel to it,
Right.
but rather an unofficial sequel to The Wizard of Oz is Return to Oz, where uh, you no longer have, the you no longer have Judy Garland, who is playing Dorothy. Which I mean, I have my thoughts on Judy Garland playing Dorothy. I think she was incredible in the role, but at the same time, she kind of looked a little too old in the role.
Yeah, for sure.
And when they made Return to Oz, and I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, but Feyruzu Bach or Bach, she was sort of like the actual little girl version of Dorothy,
Mhm.
who ended up getting trapped into a nightmare of what Oz is. And let's take a little look at what that nightmare is and give our thoughts on it.
Dorothy girl.
Now, that's a kids' film? Holy shit! What what the fuck? Like now here's the thing. I like that because that's a movie where they really took chances you could never take today with a movie. Like today, if you made a movie, it would have to be happy, 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 or singing, 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 which is what Wicked was. Which maybe I should do an episode of it. I'm not a fan of Wicked. Like we know what's going to happen to the witch, but like we need two movies to explain it. Okay, they better do a good job with that character development in movie two to really sell me. But when you get to Return to Oz, uh, the director of that movie, Walter Murch, he is like a long time film editor, very well known film editor. He may have won some Oscars for editing, I think, for Cold Mountain, but like his sound design with THX 1138 is brilliant. And he came up with this idea with Disney, I think, around the time the rights to the Oz books were sort of becoming public domain. And when he did this, he came up with this idea that's actually closer to what the books are actually like, but it was maybe a little more horrifying and audiences didn't quite embrace it. And I watched it for the first time and I thought, you know what? I really like what this movie's doing by doing the complete polar opposite of The Wizard of Oz because it was so famous. But I also think that there was a lot of failures in that. But when you get to that clip where Dorothy, she's meeting like this Princess Bombay or some bullshit. I don't remember what her name was, but like she was basically the character that held the MacGuffin that could find the Scarecrow. And what they did that with that scene is absolutely horrifying because that's something you would see in your nightmares. You have zombies coming at you, you have headless corpses walking around, and like, frankly, it's something that's even more scary than I see in mainstream horror films because it's not the gore that scares us, but rather the content and the imagery and the overall, to sound like a snob, mise en scène behind it. But I don't know if you've ever seen Return to Oz, Jeff. If you have,
I
what was
did.
the
Yeah.
atmosphere like with the audience when it came out?
Well, I think it was kind of set up to fail by being very closely aligned to your point of the Oz books, which were more adult, not as appealing to children per se, and definitely dialed up to the edgy, more sort of fantastical and even horrific kind of storytelling that was. Oz was created to be a very scary place in many regards, and it is even in the 39 classic film. But to your point, they were very closely aligned to not only the sort of vibe of the books, but also the visualization of the book. If you look at the illustrations in the Oz series, they're kind of scary. I mean, obviously they had to put human actors in the costumes, so they have a certain amount of recognizability as human figures and proportions. But in the actual illustrations of the book, the Skin Man is kind of this barrel-chested guy with very skinny legs and arms. And right there, off the bat, that looks kind of frightening. And indeed, Dorothy is a very young child in that, not quite the almost on the verge of adolescence that the Judy Garland Dorothy suggests in the 39 film. I think Murch, as a very talented man, he did the sound design for many films and edited many of them. I mean, his track record is fascinating. Everything from doing sound on the Godfather films to Apocalypse Now to doing things with, I think the year that he did, he won 2 Oscars for sound and editing for The English Patient. So
Wow.
he's done a lot and behind the camera and, putting the film together, cutting it and things like that. And I think he was kind of a master of all the things for Return to Oz, but I think it was so far afield of the 1939 film that everybody loves that, and people really today aren't familiar with the Oz books, that it just creeped the hell out of people and stood out almost as kind of this, dare I say, nightmare that people really didn't want to partake in, and it bombed at the box office. And I don't think it was a very critically accepted hit either, because I think it was sort of dark and so mean and stuff. And again, I think at that time there was a certain amount of sacrilegion involved in even trying to play off of the classic Wizard of Oz and do something different with it. So people didn't like that. Here, then some 20 plus odd years later, they did the Wicked musical, which is a reinterpretation of the material from Gregory Maguire's novel of the same name, which basically sympathizes with the backstory of the Wicked Witch and how she became who she is, as well as telling how Glinda and she were once close friends and roommates at school, et cetera, et cetera. So that, I think, was given a little more license because it wasn't so close to either the actual Baum books or, dare I say, the 39 movie. Plus, it started on Broadway, and I think that helps. So it's a different kind of visual experience for you. It's a different kind of thing to look at. And both the witch and both of the witches, Glinda and Elphaba in Wicked, are portrayed sympathetically. And I'll just give you a spoiler warning, Mike. They are in the second one too. You're not going to see Cynthia Erivo turn into a cackling hag like Margaret Hamilton played. Interestingly enough, Gail Sondergaard, a
Oh.
very famous character actress. What's the matter?
Huh? Oh, nothing. You just said
Can you hear
she's
me?
not going to turn into the hag, and now I'm disappointed.
Oh, no, I'm just going to say Gail Sondergaard, who was a
Yeah.
famous actress in the 30s, was originally cast as the Wicked Witch, but she was very pretty, and they thought they were going to go sort of for this counter idea to the witches being glamorous, but then they decided that was probably going to confuse children and maybe seem too adult, and they wanted this to be more of an all-family film, so they recast Hamilton, had it, and had her go with the pointy chin and the big nose and the more sort of evil version that women that Wicked Witch characters have been played in Halloween and other things for years and years for kids. But yeah, I think Return to Oz is all but forgotten now. There's some talk about maybe bringing it back because of the success of Wicked, but I'm not so sure. I think those books are a hard sell even for kids to read today because they really weren't aimed at kids, and I don't know if they'd have the family appeal if they were made into film. So my guess is they won't.
Yeah, I never knew they weren't aimed at kids. I know that they changed elements of the Wizard of Oz, like the Tin Man. he doesn't have a heart because he was actually kind of a heartless person, and that's why he wound up
Right.
the way he is. But of course, they made him like this lovable guy in the movie, and of course, it paid off in spades. But yeah,
Right.
I
Right.
think the 80s era of Disney movies were like a little dark because they didn't really know what market to find, which is funny because like the 80s, that was kind of like the era of optimism after Vietnam and all the craziness that was happening for the last few years. And I think the antithesis of it just wasn't sellable at the time. And it kind of became sellable like when you got towards like the later 90s when like when the Matrix and stuff like that were coming around. And I
Yeah.
just think the movie just didn't come out at the right time. And I think that I watched it. I think it's not quite successful
Yeah.
because like there's like a lot of questionable character elements in it. Like in the beginning, like Dorothy's telling everyone about the land of Oz and all that. And when do you think, well, that's just a child's imagination. That's nothing serious. Yet her parents, her aunts and uncle, I don't know. I never watched The Wizard of Oz much because I kind of thought it was creepy when it was supposed to be a kid's film. But that's what I thought when I was a kid, and now as an adult, I mean, it's not quite the same. But, anyways, uh, it's weird that her guardians are taking her to a nut house and giving her electroshock therapy all because she has this imagination. It just feels like
Yeah.
in terms of story that makes them horrible, hateful people. And maybe it was that way in the book, but when you're making a movie like 40 years later after something everyone has known, it's not quite successful. But as a movie itself, it's interesting, but the story isn't quite engaging. It's more like a wow, this is a cool
Right.
experiment. And like all of its aesthetics work, but as a story, it's just kind of like we're doing the same thing, but we're making it dark, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And I feel like The Land of Oz kind of just works for one movie unless they want to really get into the intricacies of the books. But anyways, that was my
Yeah.
rant
I
on
think
the
that's
film.
fair to say.
Yeah,
I mean, it was a noble experiment. I think a lot of it was
yeah,
well done, but ultimately, I think it was so different, radically different from what people knew from the '39 version, and it was too adult and too ugly and too nasty, sort of playing off of, or maybe even heightening those elements from the series of books by L. Frank Baum. Um, but there's no way you can have a room full of headless
yeah.
women talking to a child and not have half the people in the audience, be the adult or children, just wince and maybe cower.
Well, I just imagine if someone's on Disney Plus, they're like, "Oh, this is nice," and they turn it on, and then
Yeah.
that stuff comes up, and everyone's like, "Why are they giving Dorothy electroshock therapy? Oh my god!" But I mean, yeah, it's like
Yeah.
it
That doesn't
probably
make
was.
any sense.
Yeah, but there's like a real bravery to it. It's like, holy shit. They actually like greenlit this and turned this into a movie. And
Hmm.
like maybe it's not a successful experiment, but at least like it wasn't just like the same shit that you see with Marvel film these days. Where here's the thing, like
Hmm.
I like Marvel films and I get what Kevin Feige's doing with them, but the problem with interconnectivity is that you don't have enough formula. Nothing tastes different. It's like eating the same meal every day. And at least
Hmm.
Return to Oz wasn't that. It was something different, even if it was failed, which I feel like is missing these days. But
I
anyway,
think they kind of got close to that, dare I say, as you sort of consider it to be an experiment to get away from being too formulaic, with the Alice in Wonderland films and Tim Burton did. They had a little bit of his aesthetic with it was fantastical and strange, albeit a little bit disturbing and ugly. I mean, certainly Helena Bonham Carter's enlarged head on her body as the Queen of Hearts was a sort of a terrifying head motif as well. But I think with Burton, you get a certain amount of innocence and sweetness as well. And some recognizability. I mean, the Mad Hatter is played like a foolish character played by Johnny Depp in the movies, and that's a little bit more accessible. He's pretty harmless. Where in the book he's a little more threatening, and certainly Lewis Carroll's work is very similar and dark and sort of adult oriented, like Alfred Mobb's books were. But those probably got a little bit closer to working for audiences because they were big hits. But it's a fine line, I think. I think you have to be careful about, you can do something that's scary and you can do something that's a little on the grotesque side or maybe even ugly, but you have to be careful how much of that is coming through. And to have a child who is in any way, shape, and form tortured, be it by electric shock or,
Yeah.
what the witch was maybe going to visually do to her if we went there, you just can't go in those places. It's too much for an audience, and you're certainly going to get parents screaming foul when you're going to try to convince them that it's an all-family film and the little kiddies can see it. They cannot.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I mean, I have my thoughts on this. I just think it's okay. But I mean, in terms of like idea, like, wow, I can't believe they did that. And we'll never see anything like that again. Well, although Warner Brothers did make Joker, but that was like in their, oh, we're like
And
Zack
and that was
Snyder,
rated
or
R,
yeah,
and that was rated
yeah.
R to let the kids know it wasn't really for all family.
A very hard R and a very anti-Joker film, and dare
Yeah.
I say, there is an episode of it where I defended Joker Folie à Deux because, yeah, that movie has a very interesting fuck you to comic book fans.
Yeah, and
But
I
yeah.
also don't know what they were expecting when they were so negative about that movie. When I think it was continuing the ideas that the first Joker that they had done was making sort of their manifest, and all that's here. It's about mental illness,
Yeah.
and we shouldn't be turning him somebody with mental illness into a hero or a representative of the people,
Mhm.
whether it's a clown criminal or a president or somebody in the media or whatever else. And I think the second movie just sort of held the mirror up to us, saying, "You guys are glorifying this character, and he's insane, and we should pity him, but we certainly shouldn't be turning him into, this character that we all relate to, and he's a icon and hero for our times." It's like, well, but somehow maybe when it came a little bit more obvious that that was what the media criticism was in the second one, audiences sort of rejected it. And the critical community did too. I think the filmmakers are saying, you guys were nominating this for best film and all these other things, and maybe misread a little bit of that, but there you go. I
Mm.
also think isn't it fascinating, Mike, that when you look at the Oscars, and I think there's only been one actor who's ever won an Academy Award for playing a Shakespeare character, and that is Laurence Olivier, way back in the 40s, when he wrote, played, and adapted and directed Hamlet, which was a terrific
Mhm.
film. And his version is one of the seminal ones. But yet, two actors in the last 20 years have won an Academy Award for playing the Joker. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's a great statistic that the Academy should be lauding, but there you go.
Yeah, but at the same time, the Joker is kind of a fascinating character because
Well, and they're great
you
performances. I don't think you can
yeah,
deny that. And yeah, we've never given it to a Macbeth or a Lady Macbeth or
yeah.
Ophelia or any of the characters, even in the comedies, have never been winning. And yet
Mm,
here, I mean, we just nominated Denzel Washington a couple of years ago for playing Macbeth in a very terrific performance.
yeah.
But two comic book characters called the Joker have Oscar actors in their ranks. So go figure.
Yeah. Well, well, two things about that. One is I think like Heath Ledger totally deserved that Oscar. Walking Phoenix, yeah, great in that movie, but he just kind of played himself, minus like I don't think he's violent,
Well,
kind of like
I don't know if
insecure.
that's true.
But
Well, suffice it to say, I think it was a little bit of a career award for Phoenix because he'd been so
right.
good for so many times and not won or not even been nominated. I mean,
Yeah.
I think if you
It's
were going
kind
to
of
give
like
him an
what they
Oscar, they
did
should
with
have given it to him for The
Scorsese with
Master.
Departed. Yeah.
Yeah, with The Departed, but yeah, it was a big hit and it was a surprise hit, and he committed to it and gave it his all. So they gave him an Oscar for a very good performance. But I agree with you. I think Heath Ledger's was better and more interesting on a number of levels. And Joaquin probably should have won it for something else, like
Yeah.
the Master.
Yeah, exactly. Because there's a difference between doing being a performance actor and being a character actor. A character actor is someone like, Heath Ledger, who's doing the Joker, or Daniel Day-Lewis, who's or Gary Oldman, where you get a performance actor where, dare I say, I think Tom Cruise, as he does a great job at playing himself at different variables in a lot of movies. He's great at playing a weird, insecure sex addict in Magnolia. He's great at playing an all-American kind of person who doesn't understand how the world's crumbling around him until a certain point when it affects him personally, and Born on the 4th of July. And of course, he's a great, hero in Ethan Hunt's. But we could go on forever about this. I think we're kind of distracting ourselves, or I am. That was my problem. But
let's get back to horror.
Yeah, let's get back to
Yeah.
some scary shit. But you recommended Coraline to me, and here's the thing: I've never seen Coraline, and I wanted to. And Henry Selick directed it, who Tim Burton or either the Disney took credit away from him and called it Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas. But Coraline always felt like kind of like a diet version of it, like a really long version of it. Like, why is this 20 minutes longer than it should be? And I still kind of felt those elements with Coraline. And people said, oh, it's like a horror film. It's like scary. And I went, well, it's kind of like the same imagery as Nightmare Before Christmas, especially like when Jack Skellington's giving all the presents, and then there's a giant worm eating them, and like they're holding like a decapitated head. So, but there is a certain story element in Coraline that I felt was rather effed up and is definitely warranted as terrifying. Let's take a look.
For you, our little doll. Black is traditional. But if you'd prefer pink, or vermilion, or chartreuse, though you might make me jealous.
No way!
Now, you sent me a different clip, but I'm like, that isn't quite as terrifying. But when they're saying we're going to replace your fucking eyeballs with buttons, and we're going to put, like, I don't like needles in my eye. I don't like them at all. I have a childhood trauma experience relating to needles, which I mean was
So no LASIK for you, sir.
Yeah. No. Oh God. Yeah. I wonder if you're conscious of. There's so many questions relating to that. Although I know there's no pain, it's just psychological. But
Although they say you can
Coraline.
smell your flesh sort of being burned as it peels away, and
Oh,
your eyes are
really?
flesh. So think about that if you ever think, oh, I could deal with this. Well, and you're conscious too, I think, during that surgery. So I think there's a certain amount of bravery required for that. But getting back to your point, Coraline, it might be a little long, and I think it plays more and more when you watch it in retrospect as a horror film.
Mhm.
But it is also a coming of age film about a little girl who tries to figure out to think for herself. And what I think is fascinating about it, and why it resonates with a lot of people, and I dare say resonate with me, is I think it's very much about in childhood children wanting to be independent in their childhood, whether they're ready for it or not, and sort of the define of their parents. And this plays off of sort of turning the good mom into sort of the villain that a lot of times children tend to do it with, mom saying no or dad says no, and then we're mad at them and we think they're bad guys for that. And this movie takes that kind of insight or vibe, if you will, to a logical conclusion where Coraline is enticed to maybe find an alternate parent to follow. And I think it's an allegory for Christianity or religion, where, sort of the good parenting or the good God the Father Almighty, as they say, is sort of replaced by the more immediate and seemingly fun version of that parental kind of guidance, except in the devil, where you can have the food you want and everything's kind of sexy and fun and there aren't any rules and it seems like everything is being catered to you, and it's one big, incredible show after another with different freaky things going on, and you get to watch the seed and watch the dogs and the trapeze artists and all that kind of stuff. And then at the end, it's like, well, this is kind of your soul. They're replacing your eyes to see clearly with these buttons, which kind of sew up, dare I say, your soul for this rather demonic sort of force that lives within the walls and sort of the imagination and the deepest recesses of Coraline's wishes. Um, so I think that makes it very adult. In fact, I told you when we were talking about this, I took, at the time I was married, and my wife was so terrified at it, she got a little bit mad at me. Like, this is a scary movie. You said this was going to be fun and beautiful. I said, well, it is fun and beautiful. It's also scary. But she
Yeah.
was mad at me for quite a bit after that, at least a couple hours, because she's like, I did not like watching that. It was terrifying. But we all have family issues, and I think we all have certain issues with our parents. So maybe it was playing off of some of those for her. But I didn't present that film as well to her when I said, "Oh, you're going to love this. This will be funny.
Does she hate
Stop motion
dolls?
photography. It's very clever." I don't know if she hates dolls, but she hated the sort of doll thing here. And to your
Yeah.
very point, I mean, when they pull out that button, the box of buttons that the other mother wants Coraline to replace her eyes with, like, don't see for yourself. Let us do the thinking and seeing for you.
Yeah.
That terrified her. I mean, I remember she was literally gasping and kind of like that. And I can't blame her, because it was pretty scary. And the kids around us were, I think, both like getting off on it and also kind of terrified, because it's, it's like, wow, I'm really feeling this film, but it's also, I'm feeling pretty terrified.
Yeah, I think the moment in Coraline is a little more scary than something like Nightmare Before Christmas, because like actual physical pain is involved, where they're saying, okay, we're literally gonna put a needle through your eye and we're gonna make you one of us. And it's kind of like a tribalism thing. It's like
Yeah.
you're gonna be in the group and you're not gonna be with anyone else. And then here's the thing, the funny thing with Coraline, and I kind of like it about the movie and don't like it, is that she's kind of a brat.
Oh yeah,
Like, yeah,
she's not a very nice character through most of it. But
yeah.
again, I think they don't always have to be likable or nice characters, but they have to be watchable. And I think
Mhm.
because she's an upstart and she is, sort of bullheaded and kind of sassy, that makes her an interesting girl, because she's not really the victim, even though other mother and some of the people in the other world would like to turn her into a ghost or a dead child or whatever. She manages to fight back pretty strong, and even in her real life, she's defying her parents and figuring out things on her own, and bossing that cat around.
Yeah,
It's so
yeah.
funny that she's able to
That was what
talk.
I was saying, like, Keith David is, like,
Oh, isn't he
fucking
great?
Spawn
Like,
is the cat.
I think you need to. And of course, for those who remember him as the last, probably version of the Thing in the John Carpenter movie of '82, it brings with it a lot of extra sort of baggage of frights.
And
But
how
but I
awesome
love
is
that
it
about
in
it. But
the
yeah.
yeah. I'm sorry,
Oh,
go
go ahead.
ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No, I was gonna go on a
Well, I was
stupid
going to say,
rant.
but
Go
you're
ahead.
right. Coraline is a little prickly to love. Even at the end, I'm not sure you entirely think, oh yeah, she's the kind of daughter I'd want to have. It's like,
Yeah,
it's a good thing it's just in a movie. I admire her. She was courageous and sort of prevailed, but she's a handful.
yeah. But I kinda dug it because she's kinda like a real child, because a
Yeah,
lot
that's
of
right.
kids in movies, they're, like, perfect, nice, like, little
Yeah.
angels. And here, Coraline's just kind of a B word. She's like very like mean to her parents. She's animostic towards her neighbor who's just trying to be nice to
Mhm.
her. She's mean to the cat. But the thing is, like, once she goes to this alternate life and then she finds out, oh wait, I have to actually replace my eyeballs, and these parents who are supposed to love me and they're like my dream version of what I want. She kind of gets hit with reality and the balance of life, which is, it's not just about everything you want. It's about the things that you have and how to be grateful for those
For
and how to
sure.
build a life off of it. And I think that's kind of what she learns, and it's a very common message, a lot of
Yeah,
movies.
and it's a tried
Yeah,
and true one that I think is
yeah,
probably, and they say there's only like 13 real stories that are told, and as far as kid stories, I think sometimes coming of age is learning something, but also learning that sometimes the things that you think are better outside your world, the grass is greener on the other side, is a tried and true one that still resonates, whether it's 1939, The Wizard of Oz, or in this case in Coraline. They were also very true. I think we talk about this a lot when we do our shows and
mhm,
guests on podcasts and stuff about how true the book is to, or the material, the film version is to the original story or book. And this is Coraline. Henry Selick kept it pretty close to what Neil Gaiman had written, and I
mhm.
mean, the addition of songs and sort of a musical quality to it give it, I think, a little bit more accessibility, because Gaiman's original prose is pretty cool and cold and kind of dark as well. And he's written stuff for adults that's just as creepy. But I think Coraline does a very good job of that. And I also love the stop motion animation, which I think it was such a sort of a palate cleanser in some levels at that time, because at that time everybody was wanting to imitate the Pixar shiny, gleamy, everything looks very cute and adorable kind of look. And this came along and was willing to make things look horrific when Other Mother turns into that spindly kind of skeletal, half skeleton, half spider thing at the end. I mean, that's something straight out of hell. And the whole artifice of all the nice looking home and the pancakes and the good vibe and stuff like that suddenly becomes exposed as a true nightmare scenario. So, you know, they did a number of things good visually that I think not only help the story, help give it the auspices of horror, but I dare say break away from, I think, what was getting to turn children's films and animation into a little bit of a rut of familiarity, to your point about almost formula. It all looked the same, and everybody, even, you know, the people who were coming out not working for Pixar and Disney, were trying to make it have that shiny computer-esque look, and this one rejected that, which was nice.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a limit towards stop motion animation. Although now there's a new trend. Everyone wants to look like the Spider-Verse movies, which is kind of a
Right.
good thing and a bad thing.
Yeah, mixed media is kind of a thing now,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, like I like the idea
The
they're
trouble
doing
with the stop
something.
motion is it's too expensive.
Yeah, well, it's too expensive, and it's also, you know, at this point with
Takes
computers,
time.
it's kind of pointless, you know, because you could just
Yeah,
you
I
could
mean,
make
that's the
something
thing
in
is
Unreal
it's
that looks.
very, very old school. But when
Yeah.
it's done well, you can tell the difference. And there's a depth of field that they get in Coraline
Mhm.
and a lighting that, you know, maybe they could probably get close to that in AI today. I would imagine in another couple of
Yeah.
years, to your point, they won't need to do stop motion at all.
Mhm.
But at least right now, you can still tell when it's legitimate stop motion. And like it was in this movie, I think it gives it a real quality.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot smoother too, because like, what year did Nightmare Before Christmas come out? That was like mid '90s, and this movie came out in like 2009, and just like
Right.
because it still had that jumpiness when they move their arms, but in this movie is much smoother, and it's
Yeah.
like you can tell the technology advanced, but unfortunately, not a lot of people stuck with that technology. And Henry Selick, he did come out with other movies after Coraline, but they didn't quite have the ubiquity of that film. And unfortunately, also with Nightmare Before Christmas, I don't know if it was Tim Burton's decision or Disney's decision. Just why didn't they call it The Nightmare Before Christmas? Why do they have to put Tim Burton's name? Because as we saw with Coraline, that was solidification that that movie proved Henry Selick was the real hands and eyes behind it, while Tim Burton came up with the idea. And, you know, because you could look at The Corpse Bride and it's just like this half thought out, not as good looking movie. And then you see something like Coraline and it's way better. And of course, he did Frankenweenie, which was like a remake of his student film. And I dare to say, I feel like the studio feature film version was just another version of that. But yeah, it's sad that,
Well,
stuff
Tim
like
Burton
that.
was a name
Yeah.
at the time, and I think they were
Yeah.
trying to sell names. I mean, they did that with Zack Snyder. They've done it
Mhm.
with John Carpenter. I mean, it was John Carpenter's The Thing.
Yeah.
Technically, that's the name of it, which is great that he did Halloween. And, you know, maybe kind of reinvented a little bit of horror, or certainly updated the slasher genre. And, you know, we've been sort of imitating in a version or two or 2000 the travails of Michael Myers since then. But yeah, it's usually just a marketing ploy because people know the name of somebody and they think that will mean box office, so they throw it up there. But yeah, I think you know, Tim Burton is a terrific filmmaker in many respects.
Mhm.
I think he's had problems over the years with cohesive narration and maybe sort of a tight, sort of non-meandering story. It works in a movie like Beetlejuice where you can be sort of improv-y and kind of crazy. Sometimes in others, maybe not as much. But I like him as a filmmaker, and I like what he's done. But I think with Nightmare Before Christmas, Corpse Bride, and Frankie Weenie, Paranormal, and Coraline, they all are of a similar kind of thought, too, to tie into our theme of horror, where claymation has a tendency, the box trolls, to look
Hmm.
otherworldly and even sort of create a sense of freakiness even within their regular characters. Coraline, with her gigantic head and her skinny, tall body out of proportion,
Hmm.
looks a little bit not necessarily horrifying, but certainly not normal and sort of anything but odd and kind of a little on the creepy side. So stop motion works well on, I think, riding that line between child fantasy and is this really a horror movie? I think it is.
Yeah, because it kind of plays with darker elements that,
Yeah,
you have underlying dark elements in something like Wall-E because the world has ended because we neglected everything and now we literally live in a world of trash. But
yeah,
it's played at a lighter tone, where here, like, the actual contrast ratio is much darker. It's kind of like an 8-to-1, where Wally's like a 3-to-1, to get really technical, where people have no idea
yeah,
what the fuck I'm saying.
sure.
Yeah, but you,
Well, I think it's a scale. It's a scalable.
yeah,
The horrific or horror auspices or aspects, whatever you want to call them, of
yeah,
Wally are on a scale of 10, probably 2 or 3. Coraline, for a large part of it, is just sort of fantastical, and her imagination, maybe a little bit of a dark imagination, pushing it past 5 or 6. But towards the climax, where she's trying to get back, save the ghost children, and other mother is crawling through that
yeah,
portal to try to grab her and keep her in hell forever. That's an 11
yeah,
to borrow
yeah.
from
It's a
Final
spooky
Tap.
house.
That's a pretty good
Yeah,
scary house, doorway to hell, whatever you want to call it. Right up there, at
yeah.
least at a 9 or 10.
Yeah, so to give someone some context, like if you have like a 3-to-1 contrast ratio, it looks like a regular drama or a comedy where the lighting is basic. You get something like an 8-to-1, it could be like a horror movie where you have dark shadows and then, bright highlights on certain areas, especially on your subjects. So, it kind of like, for instance, to give you an idea between examples, you have something like Coraline, or you have something like your standard slasher, for instance, but then you have something like a Michael Bay movie like Transformers, where the colors are extremely contrasty, and it kind of gives it a certain mood, especially in horror films where it's more unsettling. Although I would say I'd like to see a horror movie that's not shot that way, because if it looks like a normal film, it's even scarier. But uh transitioning from Coraline to all these kids films, let's dive into a movie that actually is meant to be scary, but yet when I was a kid in Blockbuster, it wasn't in the horror category, but rather the drama category. And that is Requiem for a Dream. You might lose your lunch after watching this.
Mrs. Sarah Goldfarb. Choose my Sarah. Choose my Sarah. Choose my Sarah.
Okay, I'm scared right now, literally just watching that. Like I'm not even I everyone tells me, "What is your favorite horror movie?" And I say Requiem for a Dream, and they go, "Isn't that a drama?" I say, "No." I think Requiem for a Dream should be a prerequisite for every classroom for kids who are thinking about going on drugs, because this movie shows you
Exactly.
exactly what happens if you go on drugs. Like, yeah, you can start with some weed, and if you stick with weed and you know how to balance it, you could be like Willie Nelson, or you could wind up like the people in this film, where you start with weed and then you go higher and higher until that high becomes so intense you escape reality and self-destruct. Because anyways, it's probably one of the most depressing and horrifying movies I've ever seen. And the most horrifying thing about that scene is it takes this standard home product, a refrigerator, and turns it into, I never expected when that mouth opened to be like glowing red and filled with teeth and like black broken cobwebs. Like that is horrifying. And the scene itself, I didn't cut to everything to avoid a copyright strike, but like they have like people from inside the TV actually appear in front of Ellen Bernstein, but they still have like that standard CRT bad cable, sort of like lines going through them and snow, and it just like everything that builds upon it really is like it's not only a bad drug trip, but it's a movie that really shows you the repercussions of, not just falling to drugs, but falling to desperation, and why that desperation, like Bernstein's character, would fall for something like a scam like she did, and wind up becoming, sort of this mess. Because when you're older and you're facing the end and you don't see many accomplishments in front of you, may like you wind up like she does. Especially, I didn't use the scene from the thumbnail, so it was kind of misleading. I was pulling a Last of Us 2 with it, but like you could see where it would take you. But what are your thoughts on it?
No, I think it's a great film. If anything, I think a very underrated film. I think it's become even more resonating with time. Ellen Burstyn's performance is great. Jennifer Connelly, and it was one of Darren Aronofsky's first films before he kind of really hit it big with The Wrestler and Black Swan. I think he's always had a penchant for these tragic characters, and even things like The Whale, which is a little bit more down to earth, and some of those more flights of destruction, and certainly Black Swan and Requiem for a Dream, where there's a lot of psychosis and fantasy, or what's happening in the mind displayed on camera for us to sort of visualize and understand what they're visualizing and seeing. It's all very dark material. It's people struggling with their own mental health, with their own position in the world, with regrets and yet sins and everything else. I liked the film a lot. It is hard to watch. It's very effective. The score, the cinematography, the cutting, and to see these characters of people who we've seen in many, many other times playing likable, down to earth, regular Joes and Janes going through this is great, because that's what the whole, I think, ethos of drugs is. And for too often in the history of film and even comedy and television and such, we tend to think of drugs as being just funny or cool. I mean, I'm not knocking Cheech and Chong. I like Cheech and Chong and some of those kind of things. And God knows Bill Maher has been making drug jokes and marijuana jokes for decades. And some of the drug stuff can be funny. Yeah, I mean, some of the stuff can be funny, but I mean, LSD and even cocaine and some of those things, they're often presented as sort of a cautionary tale, like Tony Montana getting high in his own supply, and Scarface, and the dangers of him becoming a cocaine addict. Great,
but he still got rich and lived a life no one else would really want.
And they're telling
there's still a reward to this, as this has no reward. I'm sorry.
Yeah, this has no rewards. This is no. This is just like, this is the dregs of it. And I also think those movies were always in the somewhat safe position of watching them from afar. Oh, that's not me. I don't have to care about that character. He's the protagonist, or he's the antagonist, or he's somebody who I don't like. Here, they're very down-to-earth, regular people, and we're seeing exactly what they are kind of seeing in their warped, addled minds, and it's terrifying. And it should be a very strong cautionary tale, like, don't do it, because even if there's any benefits or rewards from it, this is the other side of it. And if I can scare you by just watching it on a film, imagine what it would be like if you actually had those images in your mind and you were believing them.
Yeah.
You don't want to go.
Because he actually does make you feel like you're in that mindset. Like
that's right.
Put the camera like directly in front of people's faces as they were walking around and like just going through a state of absolute hysteria. He gets that. The way he just because I think like most movies have a certain amount of cuts. I don't have the exact number because I didn't pull the figure up, but they have like a certain amount of cuts, and this movie quadrupled that. Because whenever anyone's shooting up or snorting up, like it was just like, and then like cut to the eyeball, and then like it would get you right into that moment. And the movie's unrelentingly depressing and unrelentingly terrifying, because these aren't, as you were saying, these aren't just horrors that's like, oh, good thing that's not me. It's like, no, this could happen to you. You know, you could fall for a scam and want to join a game show, but you're cautious about your weight. So you take pills, or maybe you take Ozempic, and you end up just losing all that weight. But if you're on pills, Ozempic doesn't do it. But like if you're on pills like speed, like, yeah, your reality is going to be altered and you're going to wind up on the electroshock table. If you
Yeah.
take too much heroin, your arm's going to be sewed off. You know, if you just like the movie is not just Mr. Mackey just sitting in the corner being like, drugs are bad because they're bad. Okay. Like, it's really showing you, no, this is what it does. Like, we're not just, it's not like a movie where you see someone like fucking light up a blunt and they're like, this is bad, don't do this. Like, no, this is showing you what happens when you can't handle reality, because you have Jared Leto's character, where Jared Leto, no, not the greatest actor, blah, blah, blah. You know, everyone has their hate for him, but this is his best performance. And you really kind of feel that pain he has for his mother in the scene where she's telling him, I'm feeling great, I'm going to be on the show, but he can tell that she's falling for something, and it breaks his heart. And he's sitting in the cab alone and he's just crying his eyes out, because you could tell, like, what happens to your life when things don't work out, you don't make the money you wanted, and now out of desperation you're either selling or taking drugs or doing both. And yeah, that movie really shows you, like, in a nutshell, the absolute fucking nightmare that can happen to you in a brief capsule of time.
Exactly. I think you said that all very well. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's definitely, it plays like a horror movie, although it doesn't have all the jump scares and creatures. That's one of the things I think makes it very effective. And for me, as a film fan, let alone a film critic, what I respond to more and more in horror are films that are grounded in a certain amount of reality, where it's like,
Yeah.
okay, that could be something that could really happen, and that would be horrific to happen, versus the different monsters that we know aren't real, even if they're done well. And like, for example, some of the monster things that Guillermo del Toro has done, I think, are very effective and excellent. I love his films. But I thought the Jessica Chastain character in Crimson Peak was truly the scariest creature he's put on film. And he's put on a lot of great monsters, but she was just so awful and evil in that. And I love it too, that in that Crimson Peak movie, she is a human being, a regular person, is more terrifying, and actually terrifies the ghosts that are in that mansion. I think it's one of the cheekier, sort of, if you think about it, almost funny part of it. But at the time when you're watching it, it's terrifying. But that's how scary and villainous the Chastain character is in that film. So my respect, getting back to the point of this movie Requiem and as well as Crimson Peak, what they have in common is, I think a lot of times man's ability to be monstrous is scarier than another mother or a wicked old witch who flies on a broomstick, none of which is real. It's great for fantasy, it's great for horror, it's great for all those things. But when you start to play with real people acting horrifically, that gets me in the stomach as well as the head and heart.
Yeah. I don't feel like they're horrific people as much as they're just desperate, sad people who are exploited by horrific people, and
right.
That's what
I mean,
makes
they're doing themselves as villainous to themselves, even if we don't think, oh, that's not affecting me. I mean, self-destruction is another form of murder. Just as suicide is a form of murder, and we forget that.
Exactly. And it really is sort of about how our self-destructive nature, is horrific. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people's lives are kind of, I don't know, like, you can look at any negative movie and tie it to today's events, but maybe that's another episode. But oh boy,
I was going to say, this is rather timely, Mike, in some respects, where the horror lies.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, you watch the news today and it's just like, fuck this, I need to light up a joint and just get my mind off.
But don't go too far with that joint, mister. You watch
Exactly.
yourself there.
Exactly. Just one. Just one. You
Okay, all right. That's
know?
what we all say. I can stop after one.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But I think we have two clips left, but we're getting a little late. So I think
Okay,
we'll just stick with one clip
sure.
and we'll talk about that. And because the other one is just kind of like if you don't get the context to it, it's kind of stupid. But, anyways, we're going to go to a clip where what happens when you love your child so much and something happens to them that you end up becoming a horrific figure yourself.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at this clip from Denis Villeneuve's Prisoners and give our thoughts on it.
Tell me! Tell me! Tell me! Tell me! Where's my daughter? Where's my daughter?
Now, here's why this movie
It's
is
a great
scary.
movie.
Yeah. And here's why it's wonderful. Well, first off, this really proves how Villeneuve understood thrillers, like before he was a sci-fi guy. And I would say, Blade Runner 2049 is a little bit of a thriller. But before he was a sci-fi guy, he kind of would make stuff like Sicario and stuff like this movie where you have prisoners. And the scariest thing about this movie is it's not about people who are actually in prison, but what happens when you're mentally there because you have something horrible happen in your life and you're trying to find a solution to it. But this movie features something extremely graphic, which is this is a man who probably has like a blue collar job. I haven't seen the movie recently because like 2.5 hours. I
Yeah, he
got
had
paid
like a
for an hour.
construction company,
Yeah. And
plumbing or something like that, if I recall.
yeah. And he's so focused on saving his daughter. And I better put the spoilers up for this movie because this is a movie that you don't want to spoil. But this is about a guy who's so focused on saving his daughter. He grabs someone who is mentally handicapped, I guess the word would be.
Probably on the spectrum, at the
Yeah.
very least here.
Yeah. And he tortures him. He
Mhm.
doesn't hit him with the hammer, but he like locks him into like this plywood shower where he uses his construction experience as a way to torture this person. And in the end, we feel whole because we don't know if this guy actually knows where the kid is. And we find out in the end, he doesn't, but he kind of does, but it doesn't justify his horrific actions. And by the end of the movie, we're asking ourselves, who's worse, the person abducting the kids or this guy who's beating the shit out of a mentally handicapped person? And that's where the real horror lies because we could see ourselves in his situation where I say, I'm under too much stress. I don't care. I'm going to get the answers because the funniest thing is Paul Dano's character, he plays a character named Alex Jones. And at one point in the movie, someone says Alex Jones is not intelligent. I'm like, oh my God. Like, that wasn't intentional, but that was in there.
Well, it's
But
funny
yeah,
because I love Prisoners. I think it's one of the greatest movies of the last 20 years, and
yeah,
certainly established, in my eyes anyway, Villeneuve as one of the true modern masters of cinema. I mean, I think there's
yeah,
a handful of guys who continually do great, and he's one of them. And he does them with large casts like this one, or sprawling kind of story like Sicario, or big budgets and special effects like he did with Dune. But he always keeps it concentrating on the characters, and even if there's multiple casts or large casts, like in those movies that I've listed. And every character comes across very well in this movie. And I also applaud him. And I think part of what makes it so scary is he casts against type. At this point, yes, Hugh Jackman had played Wolverine, and he's that kind of stuff. But it's
yeah,
always kind of fun and comical stuff because he does that at the bad people. Here he's doing that, like you said, a person who's handicapped, probably innocent, or at least not as directly guilty. And plus, even if he was guilty, to take the law into his hands and to torture him and to keep him locked up like that is terrifying and not right. And we have to be better than that as citizens who follow laws, whether we're a local citizen like him or a person in power in any way, shape, or form. But this is a movie that I think also to Villeneuve's credit, and to sort of the theme of the show, is he shoots this almost like it's a horror movie. It's a lot of desaturated colors. It's during the Thanksgiving weekend, and it's clearly in the Midwest or the Upper East or someplace, wherever it is, where it's cold and clammy and overcast and on the verge of winter, not a very nice day. And it doesn't ever break from that. It's always rainy. It always looks wet. It always looks damp. It looks like it's bone chilling. And a lot of it takes place at night. He plays with sound design. He plays with children being abducted, which is a terrifying scenario. And we don't know how the kids are and what happened to them. So, of course, our imaginations as the audience run away with us, let alone you can imagine what these parents must be thinking. And in some respect, we understand exactly the rage that Hugh Jackman's character is letting out there, but it's still not right. And it doesn't ultimately help. And it's funny because the one person who's a little bit more cool and calmer about things, though he's got his own sort of demons and peccadillos, is the Jake Gyllenhaal detective in it, who manages to sort of keep it together, even though all this stuff is kind of just fraying around him, including possible suspects and bad people who aren't necessarily connected to this abduction, but are responsible for other crimes in the community. I mean, it's all kind of interconnected in this weird community way, which I think is part of the story. But everybody here is in a way a prisoner. They're a prisoner of their own imagination, their worst case scenario, running away with their mental acuity. Literally, the character that is kept hostage or prisoner in the shower of all god awful places. And even towards the end, again, you've got the spoilers up, but somebody's a prisoner under a board and a car in a hole in the ground. And it's terrifying, even though on some levels you go, well, he had that coming, but it's still terrible, let alone those kids who, will never be the same, even as they're found or saved or whatever. But yeah, it's a brilliant film and a brilliant thriller. And I think had everybody on the edge of their seats. It was a big hit. I'm glad they never did a sequel to it. I'm glad they just kind of left it alone. But it's a great film, and I'm glad that you picked it as a possibility here, because I think it's a perfect one to end with because it is so strong.
Yeah, I also, oh boy, we have a clip from Deliverance because it's literally.
Oh, we are going to touch that? Okay, well, we can go there quick.
Yeah, I think we can cut to that real quick because I feel like I'm misinforming the audience if I have a picture of the squealing a piggy scene.
Well, if they know who that guy is, and good for them. But yeah, we can touch on that quick. Yeah, that was my last one.
Yeah, I will say, like, a quick note on, and it's gonna be very quick because I'm just gonna shut the fuck up after this. But with Deliverance, I like how it's kind of like about the inhumanity of man when they're trying to be human.
That's exactly right.
Yeah,
men are the worst monsters.
Yes, right. So let's go to this clip from Deliverance, and don't worry, it's censored. And if you've seen South Park, you'll get the joke.
Now let's you just drop them pants.
Drop?
Just take them right off.
I bet you can squeal. I bet you can squeal like a pig. Oh, what squeal? Huh? Squeal now. Squeal. Squeal. Squeal louder.
Now, that moment is horrifying, and if you didn't get the context of the South Park thing, it was because George Lucas and Steven Spielberg raped Indiana Jones when King of the Crystal Skull came out, and they thought the movie was kind of like a rape. And they do it in like different scenarios. God. Yeah, I'll send you a link to the episode after the podcast. I
had forgotten that, but now that coming back, thanks, South Park.
Yeah, but at least they provided me a censor while being very uncensored, Trey and Matt. But yeah, tell me why you thought this clip was terrifying, and now.
Well, you said it yourself right there. I think the man versus man is awful, and it's supposed to be this leisurely sort of vacation, out there, sort of riding the rapids and sort of in some respects proving their toughness as men. It's just the four guys. But the fact is they're all city folk, and they're misreading kind of the environment they're in. They are kind of trespassing into this this foreign land, and it becomes very much a metaphor for all kinds of
Yeah.
places where maybe overreach by Americans, or certainly people in society, or the haves versus the have-nots, is written out daily. In this case, in the early 70s, when this movie came out, I believe it was 72.
Yeah.
It was, of course, Watergate, and most specifically Vietnam, of course, it was a metaphor, kind of a stand-in for. But what scares me about it is how calmly and sort of
Mhm.
without too much, tension created as far as filmmaking cues and tropes and things like those go, it becomes very quickly scary and turns fast. I think that scene that you showed right there, and then the aftermath where they end up able to turn the tables and Burt Reynolds kills the other guy and stuff. It's done without music. It's just done with
Mhm.
sound design, and you hear these wonderful noises of nature, but then they're interfered by these men and ordering the other men around, and telling the one businessman played by Ned Beatty to squeal like a pig. Um, it's just terrifying. And I also think the movie doesn't sort of stop. In fact, it continues to be a horror movie after that, because then they're trying to cover up their crime. And what are
Mhm.
they willing to do that? And of course, it circles back on them, and they lose uh, one of their foursome to the rapids. And Burt Reynolds, who's the macho sort of cheerleader, jingoistic leader of them, ends up injured, so he's almost incapacitated and taken out of the equation. And you're left with the rape victim, Ned Beatty, and the quiet, calm, pipe smoking sort of, gentle suburbanite, to sort of figure out what to do, how to get them out of there. How do they stop the one guy from reporting the crime that could endanger all of their lives even more, and then lie to the police, et cetera, et cetera. So it becomes this complete unraveling of sort of normal society, of propriety, of really intellectualism, until it gets down to this sort of base sort of version of survival of the fittest no matter what. And even if you sort of sell your soul or become a sinner or a murderer to do so, you do so under these terrible circumstances that you've been handed. I can't think of anything more horrific than that. It did not need music to make it scary. Just people in a place that they don't probably belong, taking a little advantage of it, abusing it, and then it comes back to sort of blow up in their faces. I found terrifying. I still find it terrifying. I also think it's terrifying for men, because I think men all have a little bit of fear of being assaulted and beaten up or attacked. I know being in a fight seems to be very appealing to people when they watch it in video games and online and movies, but fighting in real life is not. It's not positive. It's terrifying. You can really get hurt. You can get killed, and you can be attacked. And if you're raped or hit or cut, all those kind of things are truly significant, and there's no downplaying them, and this film does not.
Yeah, I think you touched on a lot of great points. There's a
Oh, thank
sort
you.
of unconscious. Oh, you're welcome. There's sort of like this unconscious, maybe revelation in the film where, um, when they're doing the whole rape scene where Ned Beatty's getting raped, um, there's this research I've been doing where uh, homophobia stems from people who might have gay feelings themselves. But at the same time, I think that this is sort of a statement about submission and masculinity, kind of like people in prison, because they're grabbing Ned Beatty and they're saying, okay, you're my victim. And to make you feel lesser than and to make you feel weak, I'm going to rape you. And I'm going to do it in front of your friends. And I'm going to make you make childish noises so you can feel further humiliated. And through that
Right.
humiliation, they're kind of going through a subconscious process of maybe burying some of their sexuality, because I look, I grew up where there was a lot of homophobia, but I never like all right, there's some things I'm not gonna talk about on camera that I did, but I've never submitted to actually, you know, getting getting into intercourse with another man. And here these guys are doing it because I think they feel insecure about themselves.
Mhm.
And I think that society builds up a certain image where you feel like I have to be strong, I have to be a man. And this movie really kind of focuses on that, but maybe it was a little too ahead of time for the audience to get. And again, like you were saying, the lack of music, the lack of cutting. I think at one point either Burt Reynolds or John Voight walked up to the director and said to him, "Hey, when do you want to cut this? This is going on for a while." And he said, "Until the moment that the audience is uncomfortable." And I think he said that because he wanted us not just to see this film, but probably understand, why is this happening? How is this still happening? Because you can cut and then, okay, I'm okay, but you stick with it, and it's really powerful. And like you were
Right.
saying,
You can't look away.
yeah,
It's forcing you to watch it, and you don't get the comfort of the tropes of film or the technique of film that allows us to
yeah,
get out of a scene early or cut from this shot when it becomes too repulsive or too difficult to watch, too tense even. I think you're right about a lot of what you said there. I think there are aspects of male dominance and sense of self-worth
hmm,
and control that go with power, which go with male being, sort of, sense of dominance in the world and
hmm,
things like that. I mean, I think rape is a violent act, and that's more a representation of it, and yet it involves sexual parts of the body. So it's using power and weapons for the sake of this violent act that play into other often good parts of our lives, and that they should be positive aspects of it. Um, yeah, I think what truly is interesting about this movie too is the rape scene is early in the film. It's probably an
yeah,
hour in or less than an hour in, and then the rest is sort of the aftermath of it, which continues to intrigue. I mean, there's that tense scene where John Voight is climbing up the mountain because he wants to avenge not only what happened to them, but he also has to make sure that they get the other guy because they have to keep this quiet. Otherwise, if he goes to the locals, they'll be arrested, they'll lose their lives, their houses, their families, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a
yeah,
lot at stake in this thing, and yet they're still in a land that isn't theirs, a world they don't understand. It was just sort of their plaything to sort of use and abuse for the weekend, and then go back to their rich apartments and homes in the Midwest or wherever they're from. New York, was it? I forget where they were from. Maybe Atlanta.
yeah.
I can't remember. But anyway,
Yeah, they're
it turns into a continuing story of how these men, while they are the victims, yes, of this assault by these two backwoods hillbillies, they are still assaulting everything in addition to that themselves. They're condescending to the locals. They think they're superior. Burt Reynolds is talking like they're almost like savages, and like they aren't even really human beings, and they are. And there's two awful ones that come after them, but then they go after them for the rest of it, and continue to play off of, we're going to pull an over on these locals and get away with this, and they do. So it's really a terrifying, I think, not only representation of the American male, of the male, of sometimes the way the men work, but specifically of an American male and maybe the entitled American male.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. They feel like I am, it's just like my dog in the park. She's little, and whenever she sees a bigger dog, she wants to be the alpha and attack
She
him.
starts barking at that big dog,
Yeah.
and the big dog's
No, she
like,
starts
I'm not even
biting
going to
him.
waste time with you because you're
Yeah.
so little. You just get away from me. But she doesn't know that. That's
Yeah,
hilarious.
she's got a Napoleon complex.
I
And
love it.
like basically this is kind of what these guys do. They want to prove that they're tougher, they're the alpha. So they're like, what's tougher than fucking you in the ass? Because you won't be able to get tougher than me unless I do that. And that's kind of what makes this movie so. And the thing is, like, when they get their revenge and all that, it's not a rah-rah, we got the bad guy,
Yeah,
but
they
more
feel
of
much
like
better in a
the
way. They just
yeah,
escape by the skin of their teeth, but it's
yeah.
it's not a it's not a glorious victory.
Yeah, it's more about the ugliness of violence when they, and it was a
Yes.
long time ago since I saw it, but it never felt celebratory. And I think in the final scene, like the
No.
cop knows about what happened, but he lets him go and
Yeah, he
says, "Don't
probably
let him do it
suspects it, but he
again."
lets him go like, yeah, what are
Yeah,
they going to really do? And at this point, to prove it would be, lost. So it's just very difficult for
yeah.
sure.
And it's just about how the cycle of violence continues again and again.
For sure.
Anyways, yeah, yeah. What a positive note for a positive week for the world.
Hey, at
But
least we had some fun evaluating scary movies that weren't created to be necessarily horror movies, but sometimes they're more effective than those that are sold as genre pieces.
yeah, I would say I think in a way, Deliverance and Requiem are meant to be and Prisoners. Those three are kind of like
Yeah,
meant to be horror,
yeah.
but
I think you could
unconventional
argue that
horror.
those
Yeah.
skirt very close to being almost horror. Yeah,
Yeah, because horror isn't just
yeah.
about like the
And
killer
certain
going out
thrillers
and
do that.
stabbing people or the ghost haunting you. You know,
Right.
scary is more about what happens to us and what can't. Like, for instance, The Shining is scary because it's tangible in a way. Is it in his head or is it not? If you've seen Doctor Sleep, then you know it's not in his head. So don't see Doctor Sleep. Although I just watch it just for Rebecca Ferguson. Anyways, Jeff, what would you like to plug before we take off?
Well, I am Jeff York, as Mike said early in the show. I write a movie blog called theestablishingshot.org. You can go there and find my reviews. If there's a movie or show I particularly like or impresses me, I tend to draw it. So I do a caricature. You can find me on Facebook as Jeff York Chicago or Jeff York Characters. Same thing on um, Instagram. And I also am Jeff York Chicago on TikTok, where I do a 1 minute movie review. If I like a movie, if I saw a movie that week that I didn't like, I don't do a review. And Mike is there too, but I tend to showcase the movie through the illustration I do to accompany the review and talk about sort of how that connects with my take on the film and what I think the film is trying to do, all in a minute. So it's not a big ask for somebody on that platform. But just having fun guesting with people like you too, Mike, and your terrific show and other places. So follow me on those social media places, and you'll know that I'm on Mike's show or doing other things. So thank you.
Yeah, well, Jeff, it's always a pleasure having you on. I love having you talk about movies because you have so much knowledge behind them. It's so much fun to be with. And you can find me at ypareviews.com. The YPA stands for You'll Probably Agree. So if you have SoundCloud, if you have iTunes, or I'm sorry, it's called Apple Podcasts now or something like that. I'm old, man. Come on, I'm gonna turn 40 in a few months.
Not that old, young man.
I know. Well, I'll be in the grave before I know it. Anyways, and if you want to check out all that stuff, all the audio on Spotify, all that stuff, at YPA Reviews. And the YPA says for You'll Probably Agree. And if you don't agree, tell us why and respectfully without calling us names because we get nowhere by being assholes. So, anyways, guys, thank you so much. And I'll let you know what the next one is soonish. I don't want to give you any hints because I don't want to give empty promises and pull off what Ubisoft did with Naughty Dogs. Anyways, guys, thanks a lot, and we'll see you later. Bye bye. Oh no, that's not the button. Oh my god, I almost touched the wrong button. End stream, not leave studio. Goodbye.